If but my faults could trick and please my wits, I'd rather seem a fool at ease than to be wise in rage. But it is folly to expect to get there that way. They go, they come, they trot, they dance, of death no news. All that is fine, but when it comes either to them or to their wives, children, or friends, surprising them unprepared and defenseless, what torments, what cries, what frenzy, what despair overwhelms them. Did you ever see anything so dejected, so changed, so upset? We must provide for this earlier, and this brutish nonchalance, even if it could lodge in the head of a man of understanding, which I consider entirely impossible, sells us its wares too dear. If it were an enemy we could avoid, I would advise us to borrow the arms of cowardice. But since that cannot be, since it catches you just the same, whether you flee like a coward or act like a man, but surely it pursues the man that flees, nor does it spare the haunches slack or warless youth or its timid back. And since no kind of armor protects you, hide as he will, cautious in steel and brass, still death will drag his head outside at last. Let us learn to meet it steadfastly and to combat it, and to begin to strip it of its greatest advantage against us. Let us take an entirely different way from the usual one. Let us rid it of its strangeness, and come to know it. Get used to it. Let us have nothing on our minds as often as death. At every moment let us picture it in our imagination, in all its aspects. At the stumbling of a horse, the fall of a tile, the slightest pinprick, let us promptly chew on this. Well, what if it were death itself? And thereupon let us tense ourselves and make an effort. Amid feasting and gaiety, let us ever keep in mind this refrain, the memory of our condition, and let us never allow ourselves to be so carried away by pleasure that we do not sometimes remember in how many ways this happiness of ours is a prey to death, and how death's clutches threaten it. Thus the Egyptians, who in the midst of their feasts and their greatest pleasures had the skeleton of a dead man brought before them to serve as a reminder to the guests. Look on each day as it were your last, and each unlooked for hour will seem a boon. It is uncertain where death awaits us. Let us await it everywhere. Premeditation of death is premeditation of freedom. He who has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave. Knowing how to die frees us from all subjection and constraint. There is nothing evil in life for the man who has thoroughly grasped the fact that to be deprived of life is not an evil. Emilius Paulus replied to the messenger sent by that miserable king of Macedon, his prisoner, to beg him not to lead him in his triumph. Let him make that request of himself. In truth, in all things, unless nature lends a hand, it is hard for art and industry to get very far. I am by nature not melancholy, but dreamy. Since my earliest days, there is nothing with which I have occupied my mind more than with images of death, even in the most licentious season of my life, when blooming youth enjoyed a gladsome spring. Mid ladies and games, someone would think me involved in digesting some jealousy by myself, or the uncertainty of some hope, while I was thinking about I don't remember whom, who had been overtaken a few days before by a hot fever and by death, on leaving a similar feast, his head full of idleness, love, and a good time, like myself, and thinking that the same chance was hanging from my ear, and soon it will have been past any man's recall. I did not wrinkle my forehead any more over that thought than any other. It is impossible that we should fail to feel the sting of such notions at first, but by handling them and going over them in the long run, we tame them beyond question. Otherwise, for my part, I should be in continual fright and frenzy, for never did a man so distrust his life, never did a man set less faith in his duration. Neither does health, which thus far I have enjoyed in great vigor and with little interruption, lengthen my hope of life, nor do illness shorten it. Every minute I seem to be slipping away from myself, and I constantly sing myself this refrain: whatever can be done another day can be done today. Truly, risks and dangers bring us little or no nearer our end, and if we think how many million accidents remain hanging over our heads, not to mention this one that seems to threaten us most, we shall conclude that, lusty or feverish, on sea or in our homes, in battle or at rest, death is equally near us. No man is frailer than another, no man more certain of the morrow. To finish what I have to do before I die, even if it were 1 hour's work, any leisure seems short to me. Someone looking through my tablets the other day found a memorandum about something I wanted done after my death. I told him what was true, that although only a league away from my house and hale and hearty, I had hastened to write it there, since I could not be certain of reaching home. Since I am constantly brooding over my thoughts and settling them within me, I am at all times about as well prepared as I can be, and the coming of death will teach me nothing new. We must be always booted and ready to go, so far as it is in our power, and take especial care to have only ourselves to deal with then. Why aim so stoutly at so many things in our short life? For we shall have enough trouble without adding any. One man complains not so much of death as that it interrupts the course of a glorious victory. Another that he must move out before he has married off his daughter or supervised the education of his children. One laments losing the company of his wife, another of his son, as the principal comforts of his life. I am at this moment in such a condition, thank God, that I can move out when he chooses, without regret for anything at all, unless for life, if I find that the loss of it weighs on me. I am by myself on all sides. My farewells are already half made to everyone except myself. Never did a man prepare to leave the world more utterly and completely, nor detach himself from it more universally than I propose to do. Watch that I am, they say, one all-destroying day. Wretch that I am, they say, one all-destroying day takes every last reward of all my life away. And the builder says, the works remain suspended, and the high looming walls. We must not plan anything that takes so long, or at least not with the idea of flying into a passion if we cannot see it accomplished. We are born to act. When death comes, let it find me at my work. I want a man to act, and to prolong the functions of life as long as he can, and I want death to find me planting my cabbages, but careless of death, and still more of my unfinished garden. I saw a man die who, in his last extremity, complained constantly that destiny was cutting short the history on which he was at work of the 15th or 16th of our kings. But this they fail to add, that after you expire, not one of all these things will fill you with desire. We must rid ourselves of these vulgar and harmful humors, just as we plant our cemeteries next to churches and in the most frequented part of towns, in order, says Lycurgus, to accustom common people, women and children, not to grow panicky at the sight of a dead man, and so that the constant sight of bones, tombs, and funeral processions should remind us of our condition. To feast at once was thought, slaughter lent added charms, mingling with food the sight of combatants in arms, and gladiators fell amid the cups to pour onto the very tables their abundant gore. And as the Egyptians after their feasts had a large image of death shown to the guests by a man who called out to them, "Drink and be merry, for when you are dead you will be like this," so I have formed the habit of having death continually present, not merely in my imagination, but in my mouth, and there is nothing that I investigate so eagerly as the death of men. What works, what words, look, what bearing they maintained at that time, nor is there a place in the histories that I note so attentively. This shows in the abundance of my illustrative examples. I have indeed a particular fondness for this subject. If I were a maker of books, I would make a register with comments of various deaths. He who would teach men to die would teach them to live. Dicertius made a book with such a title, but with a different and less useful purpose. People will tell me that the reality of death so far exceeds the image we form of it that when a man is faced with it, even the most skillful fencing will do him no good. Let them talk beyond question. Forethought is a great advantage. And then it is nothing to go at least that far without disturbance and fever. What is more, nature herself lends us her hand and gives us courage. If it is a quick and violent death, we have no leisure to fear it. If it is otherwise, I notice that in proportion as I sink into sickness, I naturally enter into a certain disdain for life. I find that I have much more trouble digesting this resolution to die when I am in health than when I have a fever, inasmuch as I no longer cling so hard to the good things of life. When I begin to lose the use and pleasure of them, I come to view death with much less frightened eyes. This makes me hope that the farther I get from life and the nearer to death, the more easily I shall accept the exchange, even as I have experienced in many other occasions what Caesar says, that things often appear greater to us from a distance than near. So I have found that when I was healthy, I had a much greater horror of sickness than when I felt them, sicknesses. The good spirits, pleasure, and strength I now enjoy make the other state appear to me so disproportionate to this one, that by imagination I magnify those inconveniences by half, and think of them as much heavier than I find they are when I have them on my shoulders. I hope I shall have the same experience with death. Let us see how, in those ordinary changes and declines that we suffer, nature hides from us the sense of our loss and decay. What has an old man left of the vigor of his youth and of his past life? Alas, how scant a share of life the old have left! Caesar, observing the decrepit appearance of a soldier of his guard, an exhausted and broken man who came to him in the street to ask leave to kill himself, replied humorously, "So you think you're alive?" If we fell into such a change suddenly, I don't think we could endure it. But when we are led by nature's hand down a gentle and virtually imperceptible slope, bit by bit, one step at a time, she rolls us into this wretched state and makes us familiar with it, so that we feel no shock when youth dies within us, which in essence and in truth is harder death than the complete death of a languishing life or the death of old age. Inasmuch as the leap is not so cruel from a painful life to no life as from a sweet and flourishing life to a grievous and painful one. The body, when bent and bowed, has less strength to support a burden, and so has the soul. We must raise and straighten her against the assault of this adversity, for as it is impossible for the soul to be at rest while she fears death, so if she can gain assurance against it, she can boast of a thing as it were beyond man's estate, that it is impossible for worry, torment, fear, or even the slightest displeasure to dwell in her. The fierce look of a tyrant brings no fright to his firm mind, nor yet the south wind's might that drives the Adriatic on command, nor Jupiter's great thunder hurling hand. She is made mistress of her passions, and less mistress over indigence, shame, poverty, and all other wounds of fortune. Let us gain this advantage, those of us who can. This is the true and sovereign liberty, which enables us to thumb our noses at force and injustice, and to laugh at prisons and chains. both I'll keep you bound, both hand and foot in savage custody. Whenever I please, a god will set me free. I think he meant I'll die, for death is final. A religion has no surer human foundation than contempt for life. Not only do the arguments of reason invite us to it, for why should we fear to lose a thing which once lost cannot be regretted? And since we are threatened by so many kinds of death, is there not more pain in fearing them all than enduring one? What does it matter when it comes, since it is inevitable? To the man who told Socrates, "The 30 tyrants have condemned you to death," he replied, "And nature them." What stupidity to torment ourselves about passing into exemption from all torment. As our birth brought us the birth of all things, so will our death bring us the death of all things. Wherefore it is as foolish to lament that we shall not be alive 100 years from now as it is to lament that we were not alive 100 years ago. Death is the origin of another life. Just so did we weep, just so did we struggle against entering this life, just so did we strip off our former veil when we entered it. Nothing can be grievous that happens only once. It is reasonable so long to fear a thing so short? Is it reasonable so long to fear a thing so short? Long life and short life are made all one by death, for there is no long or short for things that are no more. Aristotle says that there are little animals by the river Hyannis that live only a day. The one that dies at 8 o'clock in the morning dies in its youth. The one that dies at 5 in the afternoon dies in its decrepitude. Which of us does not laugh to see this moment of duration considered in terms of happiness or unhappiness? The length or shortness of our duration, if we compare it with eternity, or yet with the duration of mountains, rivers, stars, trees, and even of some animals, is no less ridiculous. But nature forces us to it. Go out of this world, she says, as you entered it, the same passage that you made from death to life, without feeling or fright, make it again from life to death. Your death is a part of the order of the universe. It is a part of the life of the world. Our lives we borrow from each other, and men, like runners, pass along the torch of life. Shall I change for you this beautiful contexture of things? Death is the condition of your creation. It is a part of you. You are fleeing from your own selves. This being of yours that you enjoy is equally divided between death and life. The first day of your birth leads you toward death as toward life. The hour which gave us life led to its end. Even in birth we die. The end is there from the start. All the time you live, you steal from life. Living is at life's expense. The constant work of your life is to build death. You are in death while you are in life, for you are after death when you are no longer in life. Or, if you prefer it this way, you are dead after life, but during life you are dying, and death affects the dying much more roughly than the dead, and more keenly and essentially. If you have made your profit of life, you have had your fill of it. Go your way satisfied. Why, like a well-filled guest, not leave the feast of life? If you have not known how to make good use of it, if it was useless to you, what do you care that you have lost it? What do you still want it for? Why do you seek to add more years, which too would pass but ill and vanish unawares? Life is neither good nor evil in itself. It is the scene of good and evil according as you give them room. And if you have lived a day, you have seen everything. One day is equal to all days. There is no other light, no other night. This sun, this moon, these stars, the way they are arranged, all is the very same your ancestors enjoyed, and that will entertain your grandchildren. Your ancestors beheld no other one, nor shall your nephews see another. And at worst, the distribution and variety of all the acts of my comedy runs its course in a year. If you have taken note of the revolution of my 4 seasons, they embrace the infancy, the youth, the manhood, and the old age of the world. It has played its part. It knows no other trick than to begin again. It will always be just this. We turn in the same circle and never leave. And on itself the year revolves along its track. I am not minded to make you any other new pastimes. I can contrive to please you, nothing more. All things remain as they have been before. Make room for others as others have for you. Equality is the principal part of equity. Who can complain of being included where all are included? And so live as long as you please. You will strike nothing off the time you will have to spend dead. It is no use. You shall be as long in that state which you fear as if you had died nursing. So live victorious, live long as you will. Eternal death shall be there waiting still. And furthermore, I shall put you in such a condition as will give you no cause for complaint. Do you not know that when death comes there will be no other you to mourn your memory and stand above you prostrate? Now, nor will you wish for the life you now lament so much. Then none shall mourn their person or their life, and all regret of self shall cease to be. Death is to be feared less than nothing, if there is anything less than nothing. For us far less a thing must death be thought, if aught there be that can be less than naught. It does not concern you dead or alive, alive because you are, dead because you are no more. No one dies before his time. The time you leave behind was no more yours than that which passed before your birth, and it concerns you no more. No, look back and see how past eternities of time are nothing to us. Wherever your life ends, it is all there. The advantage of living is not measured by length, but by use. Some men have lived long and lived little. Attend to it while you are in it. It lies in your will, not in the number of years for you to have lived enough. Did you think you would never arrive where you never ceased going? Yet there is no road but has its end. And if company can comfort you, does not the world keep pace with you? All things, their life being done, will follow you. Does not everything move with your movement? Is there anything that does not grow old along with you? 1,000 men, 1,000 animals, and 1,000 other creatures die at the very moment when you die. No night has ever followed day, no day the night, that has not heard amid the newborn infant squalls the wild laments that go with death and funerals. Why do you recoil if you cannot draw back? You have seen enough men who were better off for dying, thereby avoiding great miseries. Have you found any man that was worse off? How simple-minded it is to condemn a thing that you have not experienced yourself or through anyone else. Why do you complain of me and of destiny? Do we wrong you? It is for you to govern us, or us you. Is it for you to govern us, or us you? Though your age is not full grown, your life is. A little man is a whole man, just like a big one. Neither men nor their lives are measured by the ell. Chiron refused immortality when informed of its conditions by the very god of time and duration, his father Saturn. Imagine honestly how much less bearable and more painful to man would be an everlasting life than the life I have given him. If you did not have death, you would curse me incessantly for having deprived you of it. I have deliberately mixed with it a little bitterness to keep you, seeing the convenience of it, from embracing it too greedily and intemperately, to lodge you in that moderate state that I ask of you, of neither fleeing life nor fleeing back from death. I have tempered both of them between sweetness and bitterness. I taught Thales, the first of your sages, that life and death were matters of indifference, wherefore to the man who asked him why then he did not die, he replied very wisely, because it is indifferent. Water, earth, air, fire, and the other parts of the structure of mine are no more instruments of your life than instruments of your death. Why do you fear your last day? It contributes no more to your death than each of the others. The last step does not cause the fatigue, but reveals it. All days travel toward death, the last one reaches it. Such are the good counsels of our Mother Nature. Now I have often pondered how it happens that in wars the face of death, whether we see it in ourselves or in others, seems to us incomparably less terrifying than in our houses. Otherwise you would have an army of doctors and snivellers, and since death is always the same, why nevertheless there is much more assurance against it among villagers and humble folk than among others. I truly think it is those dreadful faces and trappings with which we surround it that frighten us more than death itself, an entirely new way of living. The cries of mothers, wives, and children, the visits of people dazed and benumbed by grief, the presence of a number of pale and weeping servants, a darkened room, light candles, our bedside besieged by doctors and preachers, in short, everything horror and fright around us. There we are already shrouded and buried. Children fear even their friends when they see them masked, and so do we ours. We must strip the mask from things as well as from persons. When it is off, we shall find beneath only that same death which a valet or a mere chambermaid passed through not long ago. without fear. Happy the death that leaves no leisure for preparing such ceremonies.